Well, immigrant communities across the country are on edge after federal immigration agents arrested over 600 people in the past week in the largest raid since Donald Trump became president. Raids were reported in at least 11 states, including California, New York, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and Wisconsin. It is not clear if ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement is continuing routine operations or stepping up its deportations in line with President Trump's policies. On Sunday, Trump tweeted, quote, "The crackdown on illegal criminals is merely the keeping of my campaign promise. Gang members, drug dealers, and others are being removed." But the Department of Homeland Security has said the arrests were long planned and routine.
Immigrant rights activists say the actions signal a clear shift by the Trump administration to deport people who are considered a low priority for removal under President Obama. An executive order issued during the first week of Trump's presidency expanded the group of immigrants considered priorities for deportation, including those without criminal records, as well as those accused of crimes but not convicted. President of the California State Senate, Kevin De Leon, who will be joining us in a minute, spoke out against the raids.
I can tell you half of my family would be eligible for deportation under the executive order, because if they got a false Social Security card, if they got a false identification, if they got a false driver's license prior to us passing AB 60, if they got a false green card, and anyone who has family members, who are undocumented knows that almost entirely everybody has secured some sort of false identification. That's what you need to survive, to work.
To talk more about the arrest, we go to Sacramento, where we're joined by California State Senate President Kevin De Leon. We're also joined by Stephen Choi here in New York, Executive Director of the New York Immigration Coalition. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Senator De Leon, talk about what you were describing in this clip, so that when President Trump says we're deporting criminals, what it means to have a criminal record when you're undocumented.
Well, good morning, Amy. And that was a testimony during a Senate public safety hearing in Sacramento, the state capitol, with regards to my measure, the California Values Act. The reality is that the vast majority of very hardworking, law-abiding, taxpayer residents of California and of the nation who are currently undocumented, many of them do possess in some form identification that they probably secured to get access to employment. This is quite common, and you wouldn't be able to do so, say, for example, work at Carl's Jr. If you're undocumented without securing some type of identification. The reality is that there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of panic, and the levels of anxiety are extremely high, especially among children, the American-born children of these law-abiding, tax-paying residents of California, because of the most recent raids that have taken place during the past week. When President Trump campaigned on deporting the most violent, those who are criminal felons, he made it very clear just recently through his executive order that he's going to actually broaden the eligibility, the criteria for deportation. And the reality is this: we have innocent mothers, we have innocent fathers, hardworking individuals who will be rounded up because of the broadening of the criteria. And they will be making children fatherless as well as motherless, separating children from their mothers and mothers from their children. So what I'm trying to do with my colleagues in California is to make sure that the federal government does not commandeer our local police agencies, our state police agencies, and use our tax dollars to be an extension of the Trump deportation machine.
Well, you were mentioning families separated. We reported last week on the case of Guadalupe Garcia de Rayos in Phoenix, Arizona. The felony conviction that they referred to in her case was the only crime was that she had been rounded up several years ago in a raid by Sheriff Joe Arpaio and convicted on a felony count of having false identification identification, and that was the basis by which then suddenly now she's been deported with her 2 U.S.-born children and her husband here still in the United States. So this is obviously a growing problem. If you expand the definition of the dangerous felony folks that are subject to deportation to include, as you say, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have had to resort to false identification in order to be able to work, which is why they came here in the first place, isn't it?
That is correct, Juan. Again, President Trump campaigned on the promise that he would actually deport very dangerous criminal felons. But the reality is this: with the executive orders and with Chris Kobach, Stephen Miller, as well as Steve Bannon, they have their sights set on hardworking residents of California and other parts of the country, New York, Florida, Texas, and elsewhere. The case in Arizona, the case of this young woman, Guadalupe, who is married, who's been a resident of Arizona for a very long time, since childhood, who has 2 American-born children, teenagers, I believe, routinely checked in with ICE authorities. And then all of a sudden, the tone, tenor, the attitude of ICE changed quite dramatically after the January 20th inauguration of President Donald Trump. She clearly is not a gang member. She's clearly not a violent offender. She's clearly not a rapist or a thug or a murderer. But nonetheless, ICE detained her. She submitted herself to check in with them on a voluntary basis and now has been deported. This is not who we are as a nation, and this is not who we are as a state like California. We don't separate children from their mothers and mothers from their children. It's un-American, and these are not the values that we uphold as the greatest nation in the entire world. It is my deep concern that he is planting the seeds of fear, of mistrust, of anxiety, of chaos. But I'm especially concerned about young children. Because you have young children, boys and girls, who are deeply fearful that at the curbside, when they're waiting for their mothers or their fathers, will they actually show up to pick them up? Or have they been detained by ICE agents because they have a broken taillight or they have an expired driver's license? These are not criminals. These are individuals who make up the fabric of who we are as the greatest nation in the greatest state in the world.
Steve Cho, I'd like to ask you in terms of what's happening here in New York, and also, is there really a substantial difference between what's going on now in the first weeks of the Trump administration and what was occurring under the Obama administration?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference here. I mean, the fact is, under the Obama administration, you saw hundreds of thousands of people being deported. And I think that's a problem that we need to really understand in terms of context. Millions, hundreds of thousands of people every single year. In fact, the Obama administration at one point in 1 year deported nearly 400,000 people. So this kind of activity has been occurring. The problem, though, with ICE saying that these are simply routine operations is that we are in a moment that is anything but routine. We have a president who, as candidate, ran the single most anti-immigrant campaign in the history of the United States. And it's a president who, in his very first week of his presidency, declared war on immigrant communities. He has said that he is going to ramp up enforcement activity and deportations. He's going to triple the ICE force. He's going to expand greatly the number of kinds of offenses that people can commit. And we're really talking about potentially 25 million people in this country who potentially could be deported according to his executive order. So the idea that ICE turns around and says, look, these are just routine operations, we should not be in fear, people should not be engaging in hysteria, there's a little bit of blaming the victim going on. It's their actions in this moment and in this time of the administration that is causing this kind of fear.
So I want to talk